They towed my Jeep on a Tuesday morning. Not just any Jeep, a federal vehicle with equipment worth more than Karen's entire McMansion. She stood there with her arms crossed, watching the tow truck driver hook it up, wearing that smile. You know the one. I finally got you smile. She had no idea she'd just committed a federal offense. And honestly, I was going to let her keep digging. Let me back up 3 weeks, because this didn't start with my Jeep. It started with a certified letter that arrived on a Saturday afternoon while I was cleaning fish by the dock. My lake cabin sits on 2 acres of pine trees and granite shoreline about 90 miles north of Minneapolis. I bought it in 2019, a foreclosure auction, all cash, property records cleaner than a whistle. It's my sanctuary, my off-grid, off-the-record place where I can actually breathe without a Glock on my hip and a comm unit buzzing every 20 minutes. I'm Mark Holloway. Officially, I work in consulting. Unofficially, I'm a special agent with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Been undercover for the better part of 18 months, tracking a money laundering operation that stretches from the Twin Cities to Thunder Bay. The cabin? It's my cover residence. The Jeep? Bureau vehicle, modified for surveillance, registered under a Shell LLC that's been active since 2016. Quick question for you. Tell me where you're watching from. And have you ever had a neighbor who just couldn't mind their own business? Drop a comment, because you're going to want to see where this goes. So there I am, holding this certified letter, still wearing my fish-gutting gloves, and I open it up. Notice of covenant violation. Pine Shore Homeowners Association. Property, 4127, Lakeview Trail. Dear property owner, you are hereby notified of the following violations. I had to read it twice, then 3 times. According to this letter, I was in violation of community standards for: first, failure to maintain aesthetically appropriate dock structures. Second, unauthorized vehicle storage. My Jeep, apparently, wasn't luxury enough. Third, refusal to submit architectural plans for my recent construction. I'd replace some deck boards. Fourth, unpaid HOA dues totaling $4,200. Here's the thing. When I bought this property, there was no HOA. I checked. My real estate attorney checked. The title company checked. The property was listed as unrestricted, no covenants. But this letter had an HOA logo, a P.O. box address, and a signature from someone named Susan Whitmore, President, Pine Shore HOA. The fine? $250 per violation, due within 14 days, or they'd place a lien on my property. I stood there on my dock, lake breeze rolling in, holding this letter, and I started laughing. Not because it was funny, because in my line of work, I've seen this exact play before. Someone creates a fake entity, manufactures debt, files fraudulent liens, and either forces a settlement or straight up steals property through foreclosure. But they usually don't try it on a federal agent. I spent Sunday doing what I do best, research. Pine Shore HOA, according to the Minnesota Secretary of State database, was registered 4 months ago. Articles of incorporation filed by Susan Whitmore, with a registered agent listed as Whitmore Consulting LLC. The address? A UPS store in Brainerd. I pulled property records for every parcel within a 2-mile radius. Out of 37 properties around the lake, exactly 3 had filed declarations of covenant. Susan Whitmore's property, a vacant lot owned by her brother, and a third parcel owned by something called Northern Pines Development LLC. I ran Northern Pines through FinCEN. Guess who the managing member was? Susan Whitmore. She'd created an HOA, appointed herself president, and was now attempting to retroactively impose covenants on properties that had never agreed to them. It's a quiet title scam, and it's more common than you'd think in rural areas where people don't lawyer up over a $250 fine. But here's what made my instincts kick in. Northern Pines Development had received 3 wire transfers in the past 6 months, totaling $340,000 from a bank in Grand Cayman. That's not lake cabin money. That's my day job money. Monday morning, I drove into town to actually meet Susan Whitmore. Her house sits on the north end of the lake, one of those aggressively beige new builds with the fake shutters and the 3-car garage. The lawn looked like it had been measured with a ruler. There was a Range Rover in the driveway with a Pine Shore HOA bumper sticker. I knocked. She opened the door in yoga pants and a fleece vest, holding a mug that said #BossBabe. "Can I help you?" she asked, in that tone that means you're already annoying me. "Mark Holloway," I said, extending a hand. "I got your letter about the HOA violations." Her face lit up. "Oh, Mr. Holloway. Yes. I'm so glad you came by." She didn't shake my hand. "We've been trying to bring some standards to the lake community. I'm sure you understand." "I actually don't," I said, keeping my tone friendly. "See, when I bought my property, there was no HOA. So I'm a little confused about how I owe dues for something I never joined." Her smile tightened. "Well, the covenants apply to all properties within the Pine Shore boundaries. It's all in the bylaws. Can I see a copy?" "They're on file with the county." I checked. "They're not." Her eyes narrowed just a fraction. "Then you didn't check thoroughly enough." I nodded slowly. "Okay, so just to clarify, you're telling me I owe $4,200 in dues, plus $1,000 in fines, or you're going to lien my property?" "That's correct. And if I don't pay, then we'll be forced to pursue foreclosure." She said it like she was reminding me to water my plants. "It's all very standard, Mr. Holloway. I'm sure you'll find it's easier to just comply." I smiled. "I'll think about it." As I walked back to my Jeep, I saw her watching me through the window, phone already pressed to her ear. Yeah, this was going to be fun. I spent the next week doing exactly nothing. Didn't pay the fines. Didn't call a lawyer. Just went about my business. Morning coffee on the dock, afternoon surveillance work for the bureau. We were tracking wire transfers through a car dealership in Duluth. Evening fish fry with bourbon. Susan, meanwhile, escalated. On Wednesday, I found a second notice taped to my front door. This one threatened immediate legal action. On Friday, someone, I'm guessing one of her HOA board members, left a flyer on my windshield about community standards meetings. And then, on Tuesday morning, I woke up to the sound of a diesel engine. I walked outside in my boxers and a t-shirt, coffee in hand, and there it was, a flatbed tow truck backing up to my Jeep. Susan was standing on the road with a clipboard, and next to her was a guy in a reflective vest who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Morning, Susan," I called out. She didn't even look at me. "Your vehicle is in violation of parking ordinances. It's being impounded." "Parking ordinances? It's on my property. Your property is subject to HOA covenant compliance. The vehicle is unregistered and therefore constitutes an environmental hazard." I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. Unregistered. The plates were federal exempts, but she clearly didn't know what that meant. "You really want to tow that Jeep, Susan?" "It's already done," she said, and nodded to the driver. The guy hooked the winch. The Jeep rolled backward onto the flatbed, and Susan Whitmore smiled. I took a long sip of coffee, pulled out my phone, and texted my SSA. "Need you to make a call. Someone just towed a bureau vehicle." Then I looked at Susan and said, "You know what? I think this is going to work out great for both of us." She looked confused. I just smiled. The tow truck disappeared around the bend with my Jeep, and Susan stood there for another 30 seconds, basking in her victory. She made a big show of checking items off her clipboard, then looked up at me like she was expecting. "What? Tears? Rage?" I just waved. She frowned, climbed into her Range Rover, and drove off. I went inside, poured another coffee, and made 2 phone calls. First to my SSA, Bill Hendricks, who answered on the second ring with his usual charm. "This better be good, Holloway. Someone just towed a bureau vehicle off my property." Silence. Then, "Say that again." "Undercover Jeep. Full surveillance package. Towed by a civilian at the direction of a woman running a fraudulent HOA scheme." Jesus Christ. Where's the vehicle now? En route to what I'm guessing is an impound lot. I'll have the location in an hour. Don't do anything stupid, Mark. Define stupid. You know exactly what I mean. Let me handle recovery. You focus on your cover. Copy that, I said and hung up. The second call was to my real estate attorney, Jim Kowalski, a guy in his 60s who handled my property purchase and had the personality of a bulldog with a law degree. "Jim, I need you to pull everything you can find on Pine Shore HOA. Articles of incorporation, bylaws, covenant filings, liens, anything in the public record. This about that letter you forwarded me? Yeah, and it just escalated. How escalated? They towed my car. He whistled. That's bold. Okay, give me 48 hours. I'll have a file for you. I spent the rest of Tuesday monitoring the GPS tracker embedded in the Jeep's frame, a little insurance policy the Bureau installs in all undercover vehicles. It pinged at a lot called Northwoods Towing and Impound, about 15 miles south near Highway 371. By Wednesday morning, Jim called back. Mark, this HOA is a house of cards. The covenants were never properly recorded. The lien notices don't comply with state statute. And get this, Susan Whitmore filed a blanket lien against 12 properties last month, including yours. She's claiming unpaid dues going back 3 years, which is impossible because the HOA didn't exist 3 years ago. She's running a land grab. That's exactly what she's doing. And if any of these property owners don't respond, she can push for foreclosure. In a rural county with an overworked clerk's office, she might actually get away with it. Not for long, I said. Wednesday afternoon, Susan showed up at my door again. This time she wasn't alone. I heard the vehicles first, 2 SUVs rolling up my gravel driveway like a motorcade. I was on the deck, working on my laptop, tracking wire transfers from the Duluth dealership, and I watched them park. Susan got out of the first SUV. From the second vehicle emerged 2 guys in black tactical pants and polo shirts with patches that said Pine Shore Security. They had utility belts with pepper spray, cuffs, and radios. They looked like mall cops trying very hard to look like real cops. And behind them, a third man in a brown uniform that said County Enforcement across the back. I closed my laptop and walked down to meet them. Susan, I said, you brought friends. Mr. Holloway, we need to discuss your continued noncompliance. She held up a folder. You've ignored 2 notices. You failed to retrieve your impounded vehicle. And as of this morning, you're officially in default on HOA obligations. Officially? Says who? She handed me a document. Says this. I scanned it. It was a notice of default and intent to foreclose, signed by Susan Whitmore in her capacity as HOA president, and notarized by someone named Angela Pruitt, notary public. You're foreclosing? For $5,200. The amount is now $8,400. Late fees and administrative costs. I nodded slowly. And who are these guys? The man in the brown uniform stepped forward. He was maybe 50, with a gut and a mustache that looked like it belonged in a 1987 softball league. Deputy Enforcement Officer Taggart, Pine County. I'm here to serve an eviction order. He handed me a second document, a writ of eviction stamped with what looked like an official county seal, signed by a Judge M. Cranston. I looked at it, then at him, then at Susan. This is fake, I said. Taggart's face went red. Excuse me. This document. It's fake. The seal's wrong. The case number format doesn't match Pine County standards. And Judge Cranston retired in 2019. Dead silence. Susan's smile didn't move, but her eyes went cold. Mr. Holloway, I don't know what you think you know about legal documents, but I assure you, I know that you're about 3 minutes away from committing a felony, I said, cutting her off. Fake court orders. Impersonating a law enforcement officer. Fraud. You want me to keep going? Taggart took a step back. The 2 security guys exchanged glances. Susan, though? She doubled down. You have 72 hours to vacate the property, she said. If you're still here on Saturday, we'll remove you by force. And before you think about calling the police, Mr. Holloway, I should tell you, the sheriff is a personal friend. She turned and walked back to her SUV. The fake deputy and the security guys followed. I stood there holding the fake eviction order, watching them drive away. And then I did something I probably shouldn't have. I smiled. That night, I called Bill Hendricks again. I need a surveillance team and a warrant authorization, I said. For what? Susan Whitmore. Northern Pines Development, LLC. I think she's part of a larger fraud network, and I think it ties into the laundering operation we've been tracking. That's a hell of a leap, Mark. She received $340,000 from a Cayman account in the last 6 months. That's not HOA dues. That's placement capital. I think she's using property liens and foreclosures to legitimize dirty money. Fake debts, fraudulent judgments, share of sales, it's a wash cycle. Bill was quiet for a long moment. You have anything solid? Give me a week. I'll have it. 1 week. But Mark, don't blow your cover. If she figures out who you are, she won't. Thursday morning, I went to the Northwoods Towing and Impound lot to retrieve my Jeep. The lot was surrounded by chain link and razor wire, with a small office trailer that looked like it hadn't been cleaned since the Nixon administration. A guy in a stained Carhartt jacket came out when I walked up. Help you. I'm here to pick up my Jeep. It was towed on Tuesday. He squinted at me. You Holloway? That's me. Yeah. There's a hold on that vehicle. You gotta pay the impound fees and get clearance from the HOA. How much? $850. I raised an eyebrow. $850 for 3 days? Daily storage, towing fee, administrative processing. It's all in the contract. What contract? He shrugged. The one the HOA got with us. I leaned against the counter. Let me ask you something. Did anyone show you registration for that Jeep? Title? VIN verification? Lady said it was abandoned. It was parked on private property. My property. Another shrug. Look, man, I just tow him. You want your Jeep? You pay the fees, or you talk to the HOA. I nodded, pulled out my phone, and took a picture of his face. What the hell? Just making a record, I said. For when the FBI asks why you're holding a federal vehicle without authorization. His face went pale. Federal? Have a good day, I said and walked out. Friday afternoon, I was splitting firewood by the cabin when I heard tires on gravel again. I looked up. Another SUV. But this time, it wasn't Susan. It was a Pine County Sheriff's cruiser. A deputy got out. Young guy, maybe late 20s, crisp uniform, by-the-book posture. He walked up with his hand resting casually on his belt, near his radio. Mark Holloway. That's me. Deputy Chun, Pine County Sheriff's Office. I need to ask you a few questions about a dispute with the Pine Shore Homeowners Association. I set down the axe. What kind of questions? There's been a complaint filed. Allegations of harassment, verbal threats, and interference with a legal eviction process. I blinked. Harassment. Susan Whitmore claims you threatened her and a county enforcement officer. She has witnesses. The fake deputy? Chin frowned. I'm sorry. The guy she brought to my property on Wednesday. He claimed to be a Pine County deputy enforcement officer. His documents were forged. So was the eviction order he tried to serve. Chin's expression shifted, just slightly, but I saw it. Confusion. Doubt. Sir, I'm going to need you to come down to the station and make a statement. Am I under arrest? No. But Ms. Whitmore is pursuing a restraining order, and the sheriff wants to get ahead of this before it escalates. I nodded slowly. Okay, I'll come down, but I'm bringing my attorney. That's your right. He gave me directions to the station, got back in his cruiser, and left. I stood there in the yard, watching the dust settle. Then I went inside, opened my safe, and pulled out my FBI credentials. It was time to make a decision. Keep playing the civilian, or flip the board. I thought about Susan's face when she smiled at the tow truck. I thought about the fake eviction order, the fake deputy, the $340,000 from the Caymans. And I thought about what Bill had said, don't blow your cover. I put the credentials back in the safe. Not yet. Saturday morning, I drove to the Pine County Sheriff's Office with Jim Kowalski riding shotgun. He'd brought a briefcase full of documents, property records, HOA filings, photographs of the fake eviction order, and a printed timeline of every interaction I'd had with Susan Whitmore. Let me do the talking, Jim said as we pulled into the parking lot. You're the aggrieved property owner. Calm, cooperative, confused about why you're even here. I am confused about why I'm here. Good. Stay that way. The sheriff's office was a low brick building that smelled like burnt coffee and copy machine toner. Deputy Chun met us in the lobby and walked us back to an interview room. Gray walls, fluorescent lights, table bolted to the floor. Real welcoming. Chun sat down across from us with a notepad. Mr. Holloway, thanks for coming in. Like I said yesterday, we're just trying to get ahead of this situation before it turns into something bigger. What situation? I asked. Susan Whitmore filed a complaint alleging that you've been harassing her, threatening legal action, and interfering with HOA operations. She's also claiming you made verbal threats toward a contracted enforcement officer. Jim slid a folder across the table. Deputy, my client has been the victim of what appears to be a systematic fraud scheme. Ms. Whitmore has created a fake HOA, imposed illegal liens on properties that never agreed to covenants, and orchestrated the towing of my client's vehicle without legal authority. What you're calling harassment is actually my client defending his property rights. Chen opened the folder and started flipping through the documents. His expression shifted from neutral to concerned. This is a lot, he said slowly. There's more, Jim said. The eviction order Ms. Whitmore attempted to serve was forged. The case number is fake. The judge listed on the document retired 6 years ago. And the man who presented himself as a deputy enforcement officer has no affiliation with Pine County. Chen looked up. She brought someone to your property claiming to be law enforcement? With a fake badge and a fake uniform, I said. And 2 guys in tactical gear calling themselves Pine Shore Security. Do you have photos? Video. I pulled out my phone and showed him the pictures I'd taken, Taggart in his brown uniform, the fake document, the security guys standing behind Susan like discount Pinkertons. Chen's jaw tightened. Mr. Holloway, I'm going to need copies of all of this. If what you're saying is true. It's true, Jim said flatly. And frankly, Deputy, the fact that Ms. Whitmore has enough access to your department to file harassment complaints should concern you. She's weaponizing your office to intimidate property owners. Chen set down his pen. I'll need to bring this to the sheriff. Please do, Jim said. And while you're at it, you might want to check whether Ms. Whitmore has any personal relationships with department staff. She told my client, and I quote, "The sheriff is a personal friend." Chen's face went carefully blank. I'll look into it. We left the sheriff's office an hour later. Jim looked satisfied. I felt like I'd just wasted 60 minutes I'd never get back. That went well, Jim said as we walked to my Jeep, which, by the way, was still impounded. Did it? Chen's a good cop. He'll escalate this. And once the sheriff realizes Susan's been forging court documents and impersonating officers, they'll have no choice but to investigate. Unless the sheriff actually is her friend. Jim stopped walking. You think she's got the sheriff in her pocket? I think she's got someone. You don't run a scam this brazen unless you've got cover. We stood there in the parking lot, midday sun beating down, and I made a decision. Jim, I need you to do something for me. File a formal complaint with the State Attorney General's office. Fraud, forgery, illegal liens, all of it. And send a copy to the FBI's Minneapolis field office. Jim raised an eyebrow. The FBI? Mark, this is a property dispute. It's a fraud scheme that crosses state lines and involves offshore wire transfers. That makes it federal. How do you know about offshore transfers? I smiled. I'm thorough. Quick question for those of you still watching. Would you have gone to the sheriff, or would you have skipped straight to the nuclear option? Let me know in the comments, because things are about to get a whole lot messy. That afternoon, I did something I'd been putting off. I drove to the impound lot and paid the $850 to get my Jeep back. The guy in the Carhartt jacket looked nervous when I walked in. Hey man. Look, about the other day. Just give me my keys. Yeah, okay, but I gotta tell you, the lady from the HOA called. She said if you picked up the vehicle, I was supposed to let her know. You going to do that? He looked at the $850 in cash I'd just put on the counter. Then he looked at me. Nah, he said, and handed me the keys. I drove the Jeep back to the cabin, parked it behind the woodshed where it wasn't visible from the road, and spent the next 2 hours running a full diagnostic on the surveillance equipment. Everything was intact. Cameras, recorders, GPS, encrypted comms. Susan's tow truck stunt had been an annoyance, but she hadn't compromised the Bureau's tech. Still, the fact that she'd been bold enough to tow a vehicle off private property told me she was either incredibly stupid or incredibly confident. I was betting on the latter. Sunday was quiet. Too quiet. No visits from Susan. No fake deputies. No threatening letters. Just birdsong and the sound of waves lapping against the dock. I didn't trust it. Monday morning, I found out why. I was making coffee when I heard an engine, Not a car, but something heavier. I looked out the window and saw a commercial truck with Northwoods Waste Management painted on the side, backing up to the edge of my property line. Two guys got out and started unloading garbage. Not bags, not cans. Industrial-sized piles of construction debris, broken drywall, splintered lumber, old shingles, rusted rebar. They just dumped it in a heap about 10 feet from my driveway. I walked outside. Hey, what the hell are you doing? One of the guys looked up. Got a work order. Dump site, 4127, Lakeview Trail. This isn't a dump site. This is my property. He shrugged. Take it up with whoever called it in, man. We just haul. They finished dumping, got back in the truck, and drove off. I stood there staring at a literal mountain of trash on my land. Then I saw her, Susan, standing on the road about 50 yards away, holding her phone up. She was filming me. I waved. She lowered the phone, got in her Range Rover, and left. I called Jim immediately. They dumped garbage on my property. What? Actual garbage. A truck full of construction debris. And Susan was there filming it. Jim swore under his breath. She's building a case. She's going to claim you're running an illegal dump site or violating environmental codes. Can she do that? She can try. And if she's got someone at the county, she might be able to trigger an inspection. Mark, this is escalating fast. We need to get ahead of it. I'm already ahead of it, I said. That afternoon, I installed 4 trail cameras around the perimeter of my property, motion-activated, night vision, cloud backup. If Susan or her goons came back, I'd have it on video. Then I made another call to Bill Hendricks. I need federal jurisdiction on this, I said. Mark, she's not stopping. Fake evictions, illegal towing. Now she's dumping hazardous waste on federal property. Your cabin's not federal property. I'm a federal agent residing there undercover. That makes it an operational asset. Bill sighed. You're really going to die on this hill, aren't you? Bill, she's laundering money through property fraud. I've got wire transfers, shell companies, and a pattern of lien-based foreclosures across 3 counties. This isn't about my cabin anymore. It's about a criminal network. Silence. Then, send me everything you have. If I can make a case for jurisdiction, I'll run it up the chain. But Mark, if you're wrong about this, I'm not wrong. Tuesday morning, I woke up to the sound of chainsaws. I bolted out of bed, threw on jeans, and ran outside. 3 guys in reflective vests were cutting down trees on the edge of my property, big, old-growth pines that had been there for decades. Stop, I shouted, running toward them. What are you doing? One of them shut off his chainsaw. Clearing hazardous trees. Work order from the county. On whose authority? He pulled out a clipboard and showed me a document. Emergency Tree Removal Order, Pine County Environmental Services, authorized by Susan Whitmore, HOA Environmental Compliance Officer. I stared at it. This is my property. You don't have permission to be here. Says here it's HOA common land. It's not. The guy looked uncomfortable. Look, man, we're just contractors. We got paid to clear trees. You got a problem, call the county. I pulled out my phone and took pictures of them. The trucks, the document, everything. One of the guys muttered, let's just finish and get out of here. They cut down 4 more trees. Trees I'd sat under, fished under, watched sunsets under, loaded them onto a truck, and drove away. I stood in my yard, staring at the stumps, sawdust still drifting in the air. And then I heard it, the sound of an engine. Another truck. This time, it was a Pine County vehicle. An actual county inspector climbed out, clipboard in hand. Mark Holloway. Yeah. I'm here to conduct an environmental compliance inspection. We've received complaints about illegal dumping, unauthorized land clearing, and hazardous material storage. I laughed. I couldn't help it. Let me guess, I said. Susan Whitmore filed the complaint. The inspector didn't answer. He just started walking around my property, taking notes. I stood there watching him, phone in hand, recording everything. And I made another decision. It was time to stop playing defense. The county inspector spent 45 minutes poking around my property with his clipboard, taking photos of the illegally dumped construction debris, the fresh tree stumps, and my woodpile like it was evidence of something nefarious. He didn't say much, just asked questions about how long I'd owned the property, whether I had permits for the deck repairs, if I was operating any kind of business from the residence. I answered everything calmly, showed him my property deed, my paid tax records, and the timeline Jim had prepared documenting Susan's harassment campaign. He looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Holloway, I'm going to be straight with you," he said finally. "This complaint has Susan Whitmore's name all over it, and between you and me, she's filed about a dozen of these in the past 6 months. Most of them go nowhere." "Then why are you here?" "Because I have to follow up. It's my job." He closed his clipboard. "But for what it's worth, I don't see any violations. The debris isn't yours. You've got photos proving it was dumped without your consent. The trees were cut by contractors who didn't verify property lines. And your deck repairs don't require permitting under county code. So I'm clear." "You're clear. I'll file my report, and that should be the end of it." He paused. "But if she keeps coming at you like this, you might want to consider a restraining order." "She's persistent." "Persistent," I repeated. "That's one word for it." He drove away, and I stood in the yard staring at the stumps, the pile of garbage, the scarred landscape of what used to be my sanctuary. And I stopped being patient. That night, I called in a favor. Her name was Rachel Voss, and she was a forensic accountant with the Bureau's Financial Crimes Unit, one of the best in the country at tracing money through shell companies, offshore accounts, and real estate schemes. We'd worked together on 3 major cases, and she owed me after I'd covered for her during a blown surveillance op in Detroit. "Mark Holloway," she said when she answered. "You only call me when you need something illegal." "Not illegal. Creative. Same thing. What do you need?" "Northern Pines Development, LLC. I need you to tear it apart. Ownership structure, wire transfers, linked entities, everything. This related to your undercover work. It's related to someone trying to steal my house." She laughed. "Oh, this I have to hear." I gave her the rundown. Susan, the fake HOA, the fraudulent liens, the Cayman wire transfers. Rachel listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Mark, this sounds like a quiet title scheme layered with property-based money laundering. If she's doing this at scale, we're talking wire fraud, bank fraud, possibly RICO." "That's what I think. Can you run it down?" "Give me 72 hours. Wednesday morning, I did something I'd been avoiding. I went to see the other property owners Susan had targeted. Jim had identified 11 other parcels with fraudulent liens filed by the Pine Shore HOA. I started with the closest one, a small A-frame cabin about a mile down the lake, owned by a retired couple named Ed and Diane Portman. I knocked on their door mid-morning. Ed answered, a guy in his 70s with a flannel shirt and suspenders. "Help you, Mr. Portman? My name's Mark Holloway. I own a cabin up the road, and I think we have a common problem." His expression darkened. "If this is about the HOA, it is. But I'm not with them. I'm fighting them." That got his attention. He invited me in. Ed and Diane had received the same letters I had, violation notices, fine assessments, threats of foreclosure. They'd been living at the lake for 30 years, owned their property outright, and had never heard of an HOA until Susan Whitmore's letters started arriving 6 months ago. "We paid her," Diane said quietly, sitting at their kitchen table with a cup of tea. "We didn't want trouble. It was $3,800. We thought it would make her go away. Did it? For a month. Then she sent another letter saying we owed late fees and administrative costs. Another $1,200. Ed shook his head. "We're on a fixed income. We can't keep paying this woman." "You shouldn't have to," I said. "She's running a fraud scheme. The HOA isn't legitimate. The liens aren't enforceable. And every dollar you've paid her is extortion." Diane's eyes filled with tears. "Can we get it back?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "But I'm going to make sure she doesn't take anything else." Over the next 2 days, I visited 6 more properties. The pattern was the same everywhere. Elderly or absentee owners, fake violation notices, escalating fines, threats of foreclosure. 3 of them had paid Susan thousands of dollars. 2 had hired lawyers and were fighting back. 1 had already lost their property, foreclosed on by a judge who, I later discovered, had a personal relationship with Susan's brother. By Friday, I had a list of 12 victims, a combined total of $87,000 in fraudulent payments. and enough evidence to bury Susan Whitmore in federal court. But I wanted more than a conviction. I wanted to understand why. For those of you keeping track at home, if you were one of these property owners, would you have paid Susan to make her go away, or would you have lawyered up immediately? Drop a comment, because honestly, I get both sides. Friday afternoon, Rachel Voss called me back. Mark, you need to sit down for this. I'm already sitting. Good. Because Northern Pines Development is a mess. It's owned by a holding company in Delaware, which is owned by a trust in Nevada, which is managed by a law firm in the Caymans. But I followed the money backward, and guess what? The initial capital came from a real estate investment group called Crestwood Capital Partners. Never heard of them. You should have. They're a private equity firm that specializes in distressed property acquisition. They've been buying up foreclosed homes across the Midwest for the past 3 years, mostly in rural counties where property records are spotty and legal oversight is minimal. Let me guess. Susan works for them. Not officially, but she's a regional acquisition consultant, which is a fancy way of saying she manufactures foreclosures so Crestwood can buy properties at pennies on the dollar. The HOA scam is just her method. She creates fake debt, files liens, pushes owners into default, and Crestwood swoops in at the sheriff's sale. I felt my jaw tighten. How many properties? In Minnesota alone? At least 47 in the past 2 years. Probably more if you expand to Wisconsin and the Dakotas. Jesus. It gets better. Crestwood Capital is funded by offshore investors, shell companies in the Caymans, the Seychelles, and Panama. The money flows through a network of LLCs, gets cleaned through real estate transactions, and comes out the other side looking like legitimate investment returns. It's a wash cycle. Exactly. And Mark? One of the shell companies funding Crestwood? It's linked to the car dealership you've been surveilling in Duluth. I sat back in my chair. You're telling me Susan's scam is connected to my undercover case? I'm telling you it's the same network. Different branches, same tree. I hung up with Rachel and immediately called Bill Hendricks. I've got it, I said. Full federal jurisdiction. Wire fraud, money laundering, racketeering. Susan Whitmore is part of a multi-state property fraud ring that's tied to the laundering operation we've been tracking. You're sure? Rachel Voss just confirmed it. Crestwood Capital Partners, shell companies in the Caymans, 47 fraudulent foreclosures across 3 states. This isn't a local scam, Bill. It's organized crime. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. Okay, I'll brief the ASAC. We'll need to coordinate with the U.S. Attorney's Office, get warrants, set up surveillance. This is going to take time. I don't have time. Susan's escalating. She's dumping garbage on my property, cutting down my trees, filing fake complaints. If I don't stop her now, she's going to keep squeezing these people until they've got nothing left. Mark, I know you're emotionally invested. I'm not emotionally invested. I'm pissed off. Bill sighed. What do you want to do? I want to flip her. Get her on tape admitting the scheme, naming her contacts at Crestwood, identifying the offshore accounts. Then we roll up the entire network. And how do you plan to do that? I smiled. By giving her exactly what she wants. Saturday morning, I called Susan Whitmore. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice dripping with false politeness. Mr. Holloway. What a surprise. Susan, I want to settle. Silence. I'm sorry, what? The fines, the liens, the dues, all of it. I'll pay. I just want this to be over. More silence. I could practically hear her brain working, trying to figure out the angle. That's very reasonable of you, she said slowly. I'm glad you're finally seeing sense. Yeah, well, I'm tired of fighting. But I want to do this in person. I want receipts, documentation, proof that the debt is cleared once I pay. Of course. We can meet at my office. Your office? The HOA administrative office. I'll text you the address. She hung up. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed with an address. A strip mall location in Brainerd, tucked between a nail salon and a vacant storefront. I forwarded the address to Bill Hendricks with a single message. Meeting Susan tomorrow. Get me a wire. His response came back in seconds. You're insane. I texted back. Probably. But I'm right. Sunday morning, I drove to Brainerd wearing a wire, a tiny digital recorder clipped inside my shirt, FBI grade, encrypted, with a backup transmitter in my watch. Bill had sent 2 agents to shadow me from a distance, and Rachel was monitoring the audio feed remotely. The HOA office was exactly what I expected, a rented suite with cheap furniture, a folding table, and a filing cabinet that looked like it had been stolen from a school gymnasium. Susan was waiting for me, sitting behind the table like a CEO, flannel blazer and all. "Mr. Holloway," she said, gesturing to a chair. "Please sit." I sat. She slid a folder across the table. "Here's the settlement agreement. Your total outstanding balance is $11,750. That includes all fines, late fees, administrative costs, and legal expenses." $11,750? Last week it was $8,400. Costs accrue daily, Mr. Holloway. You've been in default for over a month. I opened the folder and pretended to read. "And if I pay this, the lien is released?" "Immediately. You'll receive a recorded satisfaction of lien within 10 business days. And no more violations? No more surprise dump trucks or tree removal crews." She smiled. "As long as you remain in compliance with HOA standards, there will be no further issues." I nodded slowly. Then I leaned back in my chair. "Susan, can I ask you something?" "Off the record." Her smile faltered slightly. "Of course. How many people have you done this to?" Her eyes narrowed. "I'm sorry. The fake HOA. The fraudulent liens. The foreclosures. How many families have you squeezed?" She stood up. "Mr. Holloway, I don't appreciate." 47 properties in 2 years, I said, my voice calm. That's what the forensic accountant found. 47 families. $87,000 in fraudulent payments. And that's just Minnesota. Her face went pale. "Who are you?" I pulled out my FBI credentials and set them on the table. "Special Agent Mark Holloway, Federal Bureau of Investigation." "And Susan, you're under arrest." Susan Whitmore stared at my credentials like they were written in a language she didn't understand. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. The color drained from her face in stages, first pink, then white, then a sickly gray. "You're FBI." "That's right. But you live in a cabin. You fish. I work undercover. And you just confessed to wire fraud, extortion, and conspiracy to commit money laundering on a federal recording." I tapped my shirt. Every word. Crystal clear audio. She sat down hard, like her legs had stopped working. For a long moment, she just stared at the table. Then she looked up at me, and I saw something I hadn't expected. Tears. "I didn't want to do this," she whispered. I kept my expression neutral. "Then why did you?" "Because I didn't have a choice." The door opened, and Bill Hendricks walked in with 2 other agents. They'd been waiting outside, monitoring the wire feed. Bill gave me a nod. "We got it all," and then turned to Susan. "Ms. Whitmore, I'm Supervisory Special Agent Hendricks. You're under arrest for wire fraud, extortion, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. You have the right to remain silent." He read her the Miranda warning while one of the agents cuffed her. Susan didn't resist. She just sat there crying, her carefully constructed facade crumbling like wet cardboard. But something about it felt wrong. I'd arrested a lot of people in my career, white-collar fraudsters, embezzlers, organized crime foot soldiers. And they usually fell into 2 categories: the ones who raged and denied everything, and the ones who went cold and lawyered up immediately. Susan was doing neither. She was breaking down. "Bill," I said quietly, pulling him aside. "Give me 5 minutes with her." "Mark, 5 minutes. Before she lawyers up. I think there's more here." He looked at Susan, then back at me. 5 minutes. But one of us stays in the room. I sat down across from Susan again. Bill stood by the door, arms crossed. "Susan, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. You said you didn't have a choice. What did you mean?" She looked up, mascara streaking down her face. "You wouldn't understand. Try me." She laughed bitterly. "I'm $340,000 in debt. Medical bills. My husband had cancer 3 years ago. Stage 4. We burned through our savings, maxed out credit cards, took out home equity loans. He died anyway, and I was left with nothing but bills and a mortgage I couldn't pay." I kept my voice steady. "I'm sorry. That's hard. Hard doesn't cover it." I was 2 months from foreclosure when they found me. Who's they? Crestwood Capital. A man named Richard Vance. He showed up at my door with a briefcase full of cash and a business proposal. Susan wiped her eyes and kept talking, the words spilling out like she'd been holding them in for years. Richard said Crestwood specialized in distressed property acquisition. They needed local consultants, people who knew the area, who could identify undervalued properties and facilitate purchases. He never said it was illegal. He made it sound like estate planning, like helping people. But it wasn't. No. He trained me, showed me how to file HOA articles of incorporation, how to draft lien notices that looked official, how to pressure owners into paying or defaulting. He said it was a gray area, technically legal if done correctly. It's not. I know that now. She looked at me, her eyes red and desperate. But at the time, I was drowning. He paid off my mortgage, covered my husband's medical bills, gave me a salary. All I had to do was file some paperwork and have a few uncomfortable conversations. And when people didn't pay, Crestwood bought their properties at the sheriff's sale. Richard said they were helping, buying distressed assets, preventing bank foreclosures. He made it sound like a public service. I leaned forward. Susan, how many people are working for Crestwood? How many consultants? She hesitated. Susan, if you cooperate, if you help us roll up the network, the U.S. attorney will take that into account. But if you protect them, you're going down alone for all of it. She took a shaky breath. There are 7 of us. Minnesota, Wisconsin, North Dakota. We report to Richard Vance. He coordinates everything. The filings, the foreclosures, the sales. He has connections at county clerk offices, sheriff departments, even a judge in Crow Wing County. My blood ran cold. Judge Melvin Cranston. He retired, but Richard kept him on retainer. He signs off on foreclosure orders, eviction notices. For a fee. Bill stepped forward. Is Cranston still active? I don't know. I haven't heard from Richard in 2 weeks. He's been distant. Ever since the FBI started asking questions about the Duluth operation. I exchanged a glance with Bill. She knew about Duluth. What do you know about Duluth? I asked carefully. Not much. Richard mentioned it once. Said Crestwood was part of a larger portfolio, that the real money came from upstream operations. He didn't explain what that meant, but I got the sense that the property scam was just a side project, a way to generate clean assets. For money laundering. She nodded. I think so. The money Crestwood paid me came from offshore accounts. Wire transfers from the Caymans. Richard said it was investor capital, but it didn't feel right. I sat back. Everything Rachel had uncovered was clicking into place. Crestwood wasn't just running a property fraud scheme. It was a laundering mechanism for a larger criminal network. The car dealership in Duluth, the offshore accounts, the shell companies, it was all connected. And Susan Whitmore was a cog in the machine. Susan, I need you to do something for me, I said. I need you to call Richard Vance and tell him I paid the settlement. Tell him the lien is cleared and everything's fine. Why? Because we're going to use you to get to him. And through him, the people at the top. She looked at Bill, then back at me. If I do this, if I help you, what happens to me? That's up to the U.S. attorney, Bill said. But cooperation goes a long way. You're looking at 20 years minimum if you go to trial. If you flip, testify, help us take down the network, could be as little as 5, maybe less with good behavior. Susan closed her eyes. When she opened them, she nodded. Okay, I'll help. We spent the next 3 hours debriefing Susan in a secure room at the FBI field office in Brainerd. She gave us everything: names, addresses, wire transfer records, email chains, recordings of calls with Richard Vance. She walked us through the entire operation, how Crestwood recruited consultants, how they identified vulnerable properties, how they laundered money through real estate transactions. By the time we were done, we had enough evidence to bring down not just Susan, but the entire network. Rachel Voss joined us remotely, cross-referencing Susan's information with financial records. Mark, this is gold. We can trace Crestwood's money back to 3 shell companies in the Caymans, and those companies are linked to the Duluth car dealership. It's the same laundering pipeline. Who's at the top? I asked. Still working on that. But Richard Vance reports to someone named A. Petrov, Russian national, based in Toronto. He's the managing director of the holding company that owns Crestwood. Russian mob. Possibly. Or just a really good money launderer. Either way, he's the kingpin. Bill looked at me. Mark, we need to move fast. If Vance realizes Susan's been arrested, he'll burn everything and disappear. Then we don't let him realize it. Here's a question for everyone still with me. If you were Susan, would you have taken the deal? Would you have flipped on the people who put you in this position? Or would you have kept your mouth shut and done the time? Let me know in the comments, because I'm genuinely curious where you'd draw the line. That night, we staged Susan's release. She walked out of the field office with an ankle monitor hidden under her jeans and a bureau phone with encrypted comms. Her instructions were simple: act normal, report to Vance, and wait for our signal. She made the call to Vance from her car, with me and Bill listening in. Richard, it's Susan. Susan, I've been trying to reach you. Where have you been? Dealing with the Holloway situation. He paid the settlement. $11,750. The liens cleared. Silence. Then he paid? Just like that. He was tired of fighting. I think he realized he couldn't win. Interesting. Okay. Wire the money to the usual account and send me the settlement docs. Will do. Good work, Susan. I'll be in touch. He hung up. Bill looked at me. He bought it. For now. But we need to move before he gets suspicious. Over the next 48 hours, the FBI coordinated the largest white-collar takedown I'd ever been part of. We executed warrants in 6 states simultaneously: Minnesota, Wisconsin, North Dakota, Illinois, Michigan, and Iowa. 7 Crestwood consultants were arrested. Richard Vance was picked up at his home in Minneapolis, a $2.3 million house in Edina, paid for with laundered money. Judge Melvin Cranston was arrested at a golf course in Brainerd, still wearing his cleats. And we seized records. Mountains of them. Emails, wire transfers, property filings, fraudulent court orders. Everything. But the biggest fish, A. Petrov, slipped through the net. By the time Canadian authorities executed the warrant at his Toronto office, he was gone. Private jet to Moscow, beyond extradition. Still, we'd gutted the network. 47 foreclosed properties were returned to their rightful owners. $87,000 in fraudulent payments were recovered. And the laundering pipeline that had been funneling dirty money through Midwestern real estate for 3 years was destroyed. As for Susan Whitmore, she pled guilty to conspiracy and wire fraud, testified against Vance and Cranston, and was sentenced to 4 years in a federal minimum security facility. She'd be out in 2 with good behavior. I didn't forgive her, but I understood her, and maybe that was enough. The morning after the arrests, I drove back to my cabin. The trash had been cleared away. The tree stumps were still there, raw scars in the earth, but new saplings had been planted by some of the neighbors. Ed and Diane, mostly. I stood on my dock with a cup of coffee, watching the sun rise over the lake, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. My phone buzzed. A text from Bill. Nice work, Holloway. Take a week off. You earned it. I smiled and set the phone down. But I didn't take the week off, because there was still one loose thread. The loose thread had a name, Deputy Chun. He was the one who'd taken my statement at the sheriff's office. The one who'd looked uncomfortable when I mentioned Susan's claim that the sheriff is a personal friend. The one who'd promised to escalate my complaint, and then, nothing. No follow-up. No investigation. Radio silence. After the arrests, I pulled his file. Clean record, 8 years with Pine County, commendations for community policing. But there was something there. A gap in his financials that Rachel Voss flagged during the post-operation audit. 3 months ago, Chin had paid off $18,000 in credit card debt. All at once. The payment came from a cashier's check issued by a bank in Brainerd, the same bank Crestwood used for their local transactions. It could have been a coincidence, but I stopped believing in coincidences a long time ago. I called Bill Hendricks on Tuesday morning. I need to look into Deputy Chun. Mark, the case is closed. We got Vance, we got Cranston, we dismantled the network. Let it go. Chen received $18,000 3 months ago from a Crestwood linked account. Either he's dirty, or he's being set up. Either way, we need to know. Bill sighed. You have proof. Financial records. I can have Rachel run a full audit, trace the money backward. Do it. But Mark? If he's clean, you apologize and move on. We don't burn good cops on hunches. Agreed. Rachel had the audit done by Wednesday afternoon. She called me with the results, and her voice was grim. Mark, the money came from Richard Vance. Personal account, routed through two shell LLCs to make it look like a loan, but it's a straight payment. And there's more. Chin made 3 calls to Vance in the past 6 months, all from his personal cell. What were they discussing? No recordings, but the timing is interesting. The first call was 2 days before Susan filed her initial lien against your property. The second was the day before the fake eviction order. The third was right after you filed your complaint with the sheriff's office. I felt my jaw tighten. He was feeding them information. Looks like it. But here's the thing. I think Chin got cold feet. The payments stopped after the second one, and there's no evidence he took any action after your complaint. He might have realized what he was involved in and backed out. Or he got scared. Either way, he's compromised. What do you want to do? I could have gone to the U.S. attorney, filed charges, burned Chin's career to the ground. But something about the situation didn't sit right. If Chin was dirty, why had he looked so uncomfortable during our interview? Why had he given me his card and told me to call if I had more evidence? I decided to give him a chance to come clean. Thursday morning, I drove to the Pine County Sheriff's Office and asked to speak with Deputy Chin. The desk sergeant gave me a curious look, but called him down. Chin met me in the lobby, and the moment he saw me, his face went pale. Agent Holloway. Deputy. We need to talk. I've got patrol. It's not a request. He nodded slowly and led me to an empty conference room. We sat down across from each other, and I laid it out for him. The financial records, the phone calls to Vance, the timing of his payments. You were on Crestwood's payroll, I said. You fed them information about my complaint, about the investigation. You helped them stay one step ahead. Chin didn't deny it. He just sat there, staring at his hands. Why? I asked. He took a long breath. My daughter. She's 11. She has cystic fibrosis. The treatments, they're expensive. Insurance doesn't cover everything. I was drowning in medical debt, and Vance found out. He approached me at a gas station, said he could help. All I had to do was keep him informed about any HOA-related complaints that came through the department. So you sold out property owners to pay for your daughter's medical bills. I didn't know what he was doing. Chin's voice cracked. He said it was just a business dispute, that he wanted to stay ahead of nuisance complaints. I didn't know about the fraud, the fake liens, the foreclosures. I swear to God, I didn't know. But you suspected. He nodded miserably. After you came in with those documents, I started looking into it. I saw the pattern. I realized what I'd done. He looked up at me, eyes red. I stopped taking his calls. I stopped feeding him information. But by then, it was too late. I sat back in my chair, studying him. He looked like a man who'd made a terrible decision and was drowning in the consequences. You should have come forward, I said. I know. I was scared. Scared of losing my job, my pension. Scared of what would happen to my daughter if I went to prison. He wiped his eyes. I'm sorry. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I thought about Susan Whitmore, sitting in that strip mall office, crying about her husband's medical bills and the debt that had swallowed her life. I thought about the systemic rot that let people like Vance prey on desperation. And I thought about the fact that Chun had stopped cooperating. He'd drawn a line, even if it was too late. Here's what's going to happen, I said. You're going to resign from the sheriff's office. Today, you're going to cooperate fully with the federal investigation, testify if needed, provide records, answer every question we ask. And you're going to spend the rest of your life making this right. What about charges? That's up to the U.S. attorney. But if you cooperate, if you show genuine remorse, if you help us make sure this never happens again, there's a chance you walk away with probation and community service instead of prison time. Chin's hands were shaking. Why are you doing this? Because I don't think you're a bad cop. I think you're a desperate father who made a catastrophically bad decision. And because your daughter deserves to have a dad. He broke down, just sat there crying, shoulders shaking, the weight of everything finally crushing him. I stood up. Resign today. Then call this number. I handed him a card with Rachel Voss's contact information. She'll walk you through the cooperation process." He nodded, unable to speak. I left him there and walked out of the sheriff's office into the October sunlight. Last question for you all. Was I right to give Chin a chance, or should I have thrown the book at him? There's no easy answer, and I'm honestly still not sure I made the right call. Let me know what you think. The following Monday, there was a community meeting at the Pine Shore Community Center, a real community center, not Susan's fake HOA office. About 40 people showed up, including Ed and Diane Portman, Jim Kowalski, and most of the property owners who'd been targeted by Crestwood. The Pine County Sheriff himself was there, a gruff, no-nonsense guy named Tom Braddock who looked like he'd been carved out of granite. He stood at the front of the room and addressed the crowd. "I want to start by apologizing," he said. "One of my deputies was compromised, and because of that, a criminal operation was allowed to victimize members of this community. That's unacceptable, and it's on me. Deputy Chun has resigned, and we're implementing new oversight procedures to make sure this never happens again." There were murmurs in the crowd. Some angry, some relieved. Braddock continued, "I also want to thank Agent Holloway for his work on this case. Because of him, 47 properties have been returned to their rightful owners, and a criminal network has been dismantled. If he's willing, I'd like him to say a few words." He looked at me. Everyone looked at me. I stood up, walked to the front, and faced the crowd. "I'm not going to pretend this was easy," I said. Susan Whitmore, Richard Vance, Judge Cranston, they exploited people who were vulnerable. They weaponized the legal system, and they almost got away with it. But they didn't. And the reason they didn't is because people like Ed and Diane Portman refused to be silent. Because Jim Kowalski fought back. Because this community came together. I paused, looking around the room. I've been an FBI agent for 12 years. I've worked fraud cases, organized crime, public corruption. And the thing I've learned is that the system only works when people refuse to let it be corrupted. When they stand up, speak out, and hold the powerful accountable. Ed Portman raised his hand. "What happens now? To the properties, the money? All fraudulent liens have been vacated. All foreclosed properties are being returned. Crestwood's assets have been seized, and restitution will be distributed to victims. It'll take time, but you'll get your money back." Another voice from the crowd. "What about the people at the top? The ones who funded Crestwood? We're still working on that. Hey, Petrov is in Russia, beyond extradition. But we've frozen his U.S. assets, shut down his shell companies, and made it impossible for him to operate here again. It's not perfect, but it's justice." The room was quiet. Then Diane Portman stood up. "Agent Holloway, on behalf of everyone here, thank you. You didn't have to fight this. But you did. And we won't forget that." The room erupted in applause. I felt my throat tighten. I nodded, unable to speak, and sat back down. After the meeting, people came up to shake my hand, thank me, share their stories. Ed and Diane invited me to dinner. Jim Kowalski told me I'd earned a lifetime of free legal advice. Even Sheriff Braddock pulled me aside and said, "If you ever get tired of federal work, we could use someone like you." I smiled. "I'll keep that in mind." As the crowd dispersed, I walked back to my truck and found someone waiting for me, a woman in her 40s, dark hair, nervous eyes. "Agent Holloway." "That's me. My name is Angela Pruitt. I'm the notary who signed off on some of Susan's documents." I remembered the name from the fake eviction order. "I didn't know they were fake," she said quickly. "Susan told me they were legitimate HOA paperwork. She paid me $200 per document, and I thought it was just administrative work. I didn't realize what I was part of until the FBI showed up at my door." "Did you cooperate?" "I gave them everything. Emails, records, copies of every document I notarized. They said I might face charges, but if I testified, they'd consider leniency." I nodded. "Then you're doing the right thing. Keep cooperating, and you'll get through this." She looked relieved. "Thank you. And I'm sorry for my part in it. We all make mistakes. What matters is what you do after." She nodded and walked away. I drove back to my cabin as the sun was setting, the lake turning gold and crimson in the fading light. The trash was gone. The stumps were surrounded by fresh saplings. The dock had been repaired by neighbors who'd refused to let Susan's damage be the final word. I sat on the dock with a bourbon, my phone buzzing with messages, Congratulations from colleagues, updates from Rachel, a text from Bill saying the U.S. attorney was recommending a commendation. But the message that mattered most was from Ed Portman. Community cookout this Saturday. You're the guest of honor. No excuses. I smiled and typed back, I'll bring the fish. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I thought about Susan Whitmore, sitting in a federal facility, paying for her choices. I thought about Deputy Chun, trying to rebuild a life he'd nearly destroyed. I thought about the families who'd been squeezed, scammed, and nearly broken by a system that should have protected them. And I thought about the fact that, for once, the good guys had won. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. 3 months later, I got a letter from Susan Whitmore. It was handwritten, 5 pages long, and it started with 2 words, I'm sorry. She wrote about her husband, her debt, her desperation. She wrote about the moment she realized what she'd become and the shame that came with it. She wrote about the other inmates she'd met, women like her, who'd made terrible choices for understandable reasons. And she wrote about the classes she was taking, financial literacy, ethics, victim impact. She was trying to understand what she'd done, to become someone who wouldn't make the same mistakes again. At the end of the letter, she wrote, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that what you did, standing up, fighting back, exposing the truth, it saved people. Not just the property owners. Me too. Because if you hadn't stopped me, I would have kept going until there was nothing left of who I used to be. Thank you for that. And I'm sorry. I read the letter twice, then folded it and put it in a drawer. I didn't write back. I didn't need to. Some stories don't need neat endings. They just need to end. And this one was over. I walked out onto my dock, coffee in hand, and watched the morning mist rise off the lake. Somewhere in the distance, a loon called. The trees swayed in the breeze. The world kept turning. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Epilogue. Where are they now? Susan Whitmore served 26 months in federal prison and was released in 2025 a few months ago. She now works as a financial counselor for a nonprofit helping families navigate medical debt. Deputy Chun resigned from law enforcement, received probation, and now volunteers with a legal aid clinic in Minneapolis. His daughter's treatments are covered by a charitable foundation. Richard Vance was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison for racketeering, wire fraud, and money laundering. Judge Melvin Cranston was disbarred and sentenced to 12 years. He's currently serving time in a federal facility in Wisconsin. Petrov remains in Russia beyond extradition. His U.S. assets, totaling $14.7 million, were seized and distributed to victims. Mark Holloway still owns the cabin. He still fishes. And he still believes that ordinary people, when pushed far enough, can change the world. Thanks for watching. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, the system only works when we refuse to let it be corrupted. Stay vigilant, stay strong, and never let the Karens win.